Hello and welcome to the How to Exit podcast, where we introduce you to a world of small to medium business acquisitions and mergers. We interview business owners, industry leaders, authors, mentors, and other influencers with the sole intent to share with you what it looks like to buy or sell a business. Let's get rolling. I always love the origin story. What got you into the space? You've got a background in finance and deals and roll-ups and all the stuff you've done. Kind of what moved you into the space? What kind of intrigued you to get you into mergers and acquisitions?
Yeah, I guess kind of a lighthearted answer, but somewhat truth to it is, in short, a woman. I remember I always wanted to be in business school. Well, I
Mm-hmm.
didn't really want to go to college. My mom actually made me fill an application to University of Tennessee, which is where I was born and raised in Knoxville. And so I was watching the TV one day, and CNBC, and Maria Bartiromo came on there, very attractive Italian woman, and she just started just spitting off all these like financial numbers and what was going on with the markets, and that just like that engulfed me, man. And I'm like, wow, she's super attractive. She knows what's going on, and it's an interesting industry. I think I'm going to go in the finance route and see where that takes me with business. So, I left corporate America and, had non-compete and all that. So I had to do everything from scratch. And the market was dead. And getting out there and educating people on investments and having them give you money, especially me being in my 20s, it's like you have someone who's, 50, 60, 70 that's, has several $1 million. Like, why am I going to give some young person their money? I was able to build trust and get quite a bit of clients that way. But at the end of the day, I always reverted back to banks and like, why are they so successful, at least from a stability and financial growth standpoint? And it's all about leverage. You give a bank $1 and they, for lack of better words, leverage that out 21 times,
Mm-hmm.
and the amount of money that they're able to make on that. So whenever I said, hey, and I did my first small deal. I bought a lady's company that, had been in the industry for about 30 years. She wanted to retire and have a horse farm. And, I did a seller finance note with, I think maybe I put 10, 20% down. It was only a couple $100,000 acquisition, but I saw how that leverage and that cash flow yielded exponential returns. And, why not grow off other people's money and other risk? Obviously, you got to deliver results, or things are gonna fall apart. But putting other people's money on the line, enabling you to increase your cash flow, top line, and profit thereafter, was just kind of a sensible way that I looked at about doing it.
So was your first deal like an SBA loan deal, or was it like all seller finance?
It was all seller financed. I've
Okay.
done a couple million, not that many,
Mm-hmm.
maybe like four, five, six, in SBA 7As.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, that first one was seller financed.
And how did you come about that? You just happen to know her, or you seen it posted somewhere, or uh, what was the like? Hey, wait a second, there's something out there I should take a look at.
It was a website for people that were retiring, and
Okay.
she had actually interviewed several people. And Louise was her name. She's an amazing woman, but she taught me something very, very valuable that I still use today. And it's all about trust. So when I went in there, the first thing she said to me first things she said to me were all these like very critical, cynical, fact finding questions, but there was a lot of curiosity with it. And after we got through that first stage, she said, David, I talked to, I won't say the gentleman's name. I talked to this other person, and there are other people in our industry, and they were way more successful than me, had been in the business a lot longer. And she's like, but I think that your heart's in the right place. So I'm like, okay, well, trust is the most important currency in this industry and in business. So if I can convey the amount of trust that I have with someone that I'm doing business with, and they get a sense of that, then that's ultimately going to be one of the material components to facilitate the deal. And what I've experienced is like with small business owners, you build something from scratch, right? It's your baby.
Mm-hmm.
You have, whether people want to admit it or not, especially men, us being a little bit more masculine, like you have some very, very deep emotional attachment to your business. So just saying, oh, yeah, in theory, this person is better at doing this than me. I just need to find them, put them in place. Well, the emotional process that I've seen for myself and then other businesses that I've advised is that they want to do that, but they have this level of control around them, not because they're control freaks, but because they have built something and they built this emotional resonance around them, and actually letting go of that control and allowing others to do it without pissing them off, is something that's hard. And
Yeah.
what I found is when I was actually able to let go of the control, I was and watching someone else do it, I was actually better at them in doing it in the beginning. But me being more of a visionary versus an operator, I'm kind of in the middle on it.
Mm-hmm.
I wouldn't say I'm one on one end of the spectrum, but handing operator type duties over to someone that's really their logician mind is way more focused on that than I am. They quickly became better at doing those duties than I did.
Mm-hmm.
I was definitely more adept and better at it from the beginning. But then once I handed it over, allowed them to do it their way, even though it wasn't as efficient of mine in the past, then they did it and they started doing it and doing it and doing it. And next thing you know, it's like, wow, why didn't I do this sooner?
What are the other industries that you did so that everybody else knows? I read your bio. I know what they are, but what are some of the other industries you've done roll ups in?
Well, the finance and the cannabis space were two of the big ones.
Mm-hmm.
More so the finance than the cannabis, but I mean, there've been a lot of different industries. Which one are you interested in, Ron?
I've seen the fashion. What is it talking about fashion? You buy a fashion company or something, or you build one?
So I did not build one. That's one that I an investor in. I was a seed investor in,
Mm-hmm.
and they do fashion through junk. The company's actually called Junk Couture. The founder's from Ireland, and his whole purpose is he wants to turn fashion into a sport for those that aren't inclined, aren't the sports type. So, and he wasn't necessarily a big sports person,
Mm-hmm.
and he felt like that you can still. He knew that you could still be ultra competitive even if you didn't play sports.
Right.
So what they do is that they've partnered with some of the big top accounting firms and credit card, like some really big sponsors across the globe, and they'll have these huge events in Paris, New York, Dubai, and these children will create fashion, these huge, elaborate, and ornate dresses out of trash. I mean, you look at them, and you're like, wow, looks like someone at Gucci made, or
Mm-hmm.
some very, maybe not Gucci, but a very eclectic type artist. And so they go on the runway and they show their dresses and fashion and stuff. So that's what he's doing. He's turning fashion into a sport.
Now, in the in your coaching, speaking, and stuff like that, is the primary growth strategy you teach, is that through mergers and acquisitions, or you give them? Is there something you want a company? Is there a process you put a company through before, like that they need to do before they're ready to acquire another one? You need to get your house in order first, or can you just go buy a company?
Yeah, so I use a lot. That's a great question, Ron. I use a lot of different methodologies. There's EOS that's out there, Entrepreneur Operating System. There's scaling up through Vern Harnish, which is an amazing, high level thinking process. There's all kinds of different things out there, but like kind of the basics that a business needs that I feel like need to be in place before you add on that what I call CapEx flex, a capital expenditure flexing, putting that M&A strategy in there. Those building blocks you need are really the strategy, the first one, the people, the execution, and the cash. And you get those components in, the strategy and the people being more of the magic and intuition side, and
Mm-hmm.
then the execution, the cash being more the logician or structural side. You get a small business typically in the range of a million to 3 to 5 million, obviously depending on the industry and margins and all that.
Mm-hmm.
But you get a business in that range and you implement it, when they're in that quote valley of death for small businesses where they're either going to grow or retract and go back into a smaller revenue type range, you implement those systems there and get that in place, then you can really throw on that M&A process in the small business space that will allow you to utilize that leverage and high growth. Yeah, that's why I have a lot of respect for some of those CEOs like Tony Hsieh,
Mm-hmm.
who was the founder and CEO of Zappos.
Mm-hmm.
Is yeah, he ended up exiting and selling to Amazon, but the different emotional leveling up type stages that he had to go through, he could have exited so many times along that path, but it just speaks to his emotional competence, his business acumen, for him to be able to grow from nothing to a 5 million to 10 million, 100 million to $1 billion company. That's a different level of expertise for each of, and I'll obviously miss some steps along the way, but that's a different level of expertise in how you run those companies. And the ability for someone to do that is obviously rare, but figuring out, hey, if you're at that $100 million stage, then and recognize you don't have the ability to move that next step, there's still great ways to exit. You can still sell and then take a second, third, fourth bite of the apple through PE or whatever method you go to do it right. So it's not necessarily that you have to exit, like leave, but you more so step aside.
Take some chips off the table, and if you pick your PE firm right, you're surrounded by mentors and people that will guide you and make sure that you don't fail going on. Sometimes you stay in the same role, and sometimes you're not equipped to be in that role. It's that's a discussion between the seller and the PE firm. But I've interviewed Adam Coffey and some other people who went through multiple steps of that, right? And they got a piece of pie. Exited his company at some 3.4 or 4.3 billion dollars at the end of it, right? There's something to be said for that, to choosing the right people to be around you, the right PE firm, because they can be that bridge. They can put a board of directors in that can give you that insight, and knowledge, and say, hey, no, you're heading left. You should probably go a little right now, right? But not everybody. There's something to be said for the people that can do that, because they get out of their own way, right? A lot of times our own ego, especially as guys, we want to do things the way we want to do it because that we think we've got it figured out, and to know that you don't is a very high emotional intelligence level.
I think just the component of, and I lied to mention on this earlier, the component of trust when it comes down to everyone that you're working with, everything from hiring an employee to vendor partner relationships that you have in business, to your key employees, the communication rhythm that's involved. That's, what's that quote? It goes like, trust is the glue of life, trust but verify. There's so many different elements of trust that are required in business that, if that component isn't there, then a lot of these philosophical things we've been talking about, or even a lot of the practical things we've been talking about, it'll fall apart. So just making sure that you're understanding how to build trusting relationships, getting things started, really listening to your gut whenever you're approaching something, that's, at least in my experience, that'll, through failure and success, that'll save you a lot of headache and heartache down the road.
I tell people that I get people that say, well, how do you build trust? And I said, not by speaking. It's always by listening. The way you build trust is ask people questions and truly listen to them. Active listen. Really, truly listen to what they're saying. And then ask them deeper questions about that. Because as soon as people realize you care, as soon as people realize you want to connect, most people are open to it, right? There are some cultures and some other people may feel you're being a little nosy or whatever, but most of the time, if you truly are, in a strategic way, empathetic and just want to hear where they're at in life, what are their challenges, what are they trying to accomplish, and to see how I can help you get there, that is the absolute fastest way to build rapport and trust with somebody. A lot of people think they have to spew all their accolades and all their degrees and all that, and that's going to build trust. It usually doesn't. It usually sets off a red flag.
Yeah, I think to that point, one of the quotes that resonates when I heard you was people don't care about how much they know, don't care about how much you know until they know about how much you care. And that's that emotional component, that magic component that I talked about, in the whole M&A and small business and entrepreneur space. So there's a Harvard study that came out that I was supported in the Inc. article that was released recently, that I talked in, and 70% of mergers and acquisitions fail. And whenever you, so I was thinking about that, it's like, well, how do we break that down? There's a lack of trust is at the heart of it, but where does that lack of trust fall in? And there's six key components that I've created, and I'm sure others have as well. This is just how I frame it, of what you're actually buying in an acquisition or a merger. And none of this has to do with the money. Like, yes, you're buying cash flow, you're buying profit, all that, but what are the non-tangible factors? And the first one is time. So you can't create that in almost anything else that you do. You're buying time in an acquisition. You're buying customers is the second one. The third one is A players, hopefully A players and not B or C players, but you're buying A players in acquisition, as long as you're doing your diligence right. You're buying cross-selling opportunities. You're buying OpEx efficiencies. And one of the most important things of all those is you're buying team intel. So when you look at all six of those components, if trust is broken down with the customers, with the A players, with the team intel, trying to integrate those OpEx efficiencies, trying to cross sell to customers, selling them something different. If that trust component isn't there or is broken down, then that M&A situation is going to fall apart in a lot of situations. And that's why I think 70% M&As fail.